Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents HBR Guide to Navigating the Toxic Workplace by Harvard Business Review. Narrated by Siiri Scott and Stephen Graybill. Section 1. Working in a Harmful Environment. Chapter 1. Is your job toxic, or is it just a job? By Rachel Montañez. No job is perfect. This is what we tell ourselves after we're given a task we hate doing, when our coworkers annoy us, or when a new company policy shakes things up. We remind ourselves to be thankful for what we have. After all, we could be worse off working somewhere else, right? But the truth is, if you're relying on this reminder to help you get through the workday, there's likely something deeper going on. Have your feelings of cynicism and stress at work increased? Can you not even imagine better days ahead? Do you feel disconnected from the person you used to be? No matter what you're feeling, it's important to be able to recognize whether what you're experiencing is the result of healthy career growth and change or the result of a toxic work environment. This can be especially challenging if you're early in your career and have less of a guidepost for what a healthy and fulfilling work experience feels like. So, how can you tell if your work environment is toxic or if it's just a job? What are the signs that you're on the path to a fulfilling career or headed in the wrong direction? Here's how to figure it out. 1. Evaluate yourself. Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, said, "Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power." Before you can really know what a healthy work environment feels like, you must first understand what you value at work and what you actually want out of your career. Misalignment between yourself and your work can cause varying levels of emotional distress. If you lack clarity around your preferences, it will be harder to gauge whether your negative feelings toward work are the result of internal factors or external ones. Meanwhile, the stronger your sense of career identity, the easier it will be to attract desirable opportunities and advocates, and the more fulfillment you will experience. Think of your career identity as a combination of your personality, strengths, values, interests, and definition of success. To help guide you in developing your career identity, ask yourself these questions. 1. Which of my strengths are relevant to my current job or what I'd like to do in the near future? 2. What do I need from an employer to bring my best self to work? 3. What activities or topics make me feel completely absorbed? 4. What's my definition of meaningful work and success? It's important to be aware that during social, economic, and life crises, your interests and values will shift and develop. This is an ongoing process that you should take into account. Once you reflect on your strengths, values, and interests, don't stop there. Make an effort to understand the way you typically react emotionally to situations. For example, how do you feel after being assigned a task you dislike? How do you react to annoying coworkers or interactions? By having awareness of your emotions, you'll be able to gauge your personal tolerance. For example, emotions like annoyance, dislike, or worry can be normal and may not be a cause for concern. But feelings of resentment and sadness may tell a different story. 2. Evaluate your workplace. Once you've done some personal reflection, you should have a little more clarity around any negative feelings you have toward work. For instance, if there is a misalignment between your goals and your job, that may very well be the root cause of your negative feelings. If not, you may need to investigate further. That's where step 2 comes in. Consider the following list. How many of these statements resonate with you? I have no autonomy to set deadlines, meaningful goals, or processes. I don't see any room for internal mobility, and there is a lack of career resources to support me. The best parts of my job are the pay and benefits. They're the only things keeping me from leaving, even though I've witnessed some unethical behavior. I'm afraid to advocate for what I want and need because I often get brushed aside or ignored. I've been having headaches, trouble sleeping, and challenges with focus. My confidence and self-worth are dwindling. People in my close circle have commented on a change in our relationship. I've been using unhealthy coping outlets to deal with stress. These are all signs that you may be working in an unhealthy environment. Toxic workplaces not only impact our emotions and well-being at work, they can interrupt every part of our lives. If many of these statements reflect how you feel frequently, take note. Alternatively, here are some statements that signal your work environment is healthy and you're on the right path. Time flies by at work, and not in an unproductive, I didn't get anything done way. I'm not just recognized by my boss and colleagues, I feel appreciated too. I am committed and willing to go the extra mile, and I can often do so without sacrificing my health and personal relationships. I experience belonging, achievement, purpose, creativity, and growth through learning. I know who to turn to when I need help with my work or when I have a problem that needs to be addressed. I have positive relationships with most of the people I work with, including my boss and peers. If these statements resonate with you, you're likely on a positive path forward at work and in your career. This is a good sign, but remember to check in with yourself frequently to monitor for any changes. 3. Evaluate your options. If you do feel that you're in a toxic work environment, know that you have options. First, you can address your concerns with your manager. What are some solutions you can bring to the table that are a win-win for you and the business? For instance, if your confidence is dwindling because of a lack of high-quality feedback, be upfront about how you'd like to be guided and at what frequency. There may also be room for you to make an internal move to a department that aligns more closely with your goals. Some people may not feel comfortable approaching their manager. In this case, try finding an ally or a trusted peer you can confide in. Look for people who share your values and who will back you up when you raise cultural concerns that are unique to your organization. There is strength in numbers, and there's no reason to handle this alone. Once you have enough people on your side, you may also consider going through your organization's HR department. A widely shared concern will be hard for them to ignore. Finally, if your work environment is causing you emotional distress, even when you're not at work, try talking to a professional with an outsider's perspective. This can help you better understand what you're feeling and discern logical next steps. In the worst-case scenario, leaving a toxic environment may be your best option, especially if you've exhausted the paths already mentioned. If the experiences you've had have lowered your self-worth, it might be hard to imagine another organization wanting to hire you. But try to remind yourself of what you bring to the table. Maybe you developed an idea at your current job that improved systems, operations, or policies. This shows that you're analytical, creative, and can turn thoughts into action. Or maybe you contributed to improving the company culture through boosting morale or championing well-being, which shows your high empathy. On that note, don't forget to be compassionate and kind to yourself as you go through the process of improving your situation at work. It can be soul-crushing to be in unfavorable surroundings when you've worked hard and made sacrifices to be on your path. But remember, there isn't anything wrong with you. When you're feeling overwhelming self-doubt, remind yourself that you need to get out of your current situation to see things clearly. Remind yourself that you are worthy of a better opportunity and are more than capable of finding one. We all deserve to feel appreciated, seen, and heard at work. And yes, that can be a possibility for you. Chapter 2. 4 Ways to Deal with a Toxic Coworker by Abby Chavez. There have been bad coworkers since the beginning of organized work, but in today's matrixed work environments, their impact feels bigger and more destructive. Businesses need teamwork to function, and teams need to be more collaborative, adaptable, and proactive than ever. The days of top-down decision-making are long gone in many companies and industries, replaced by grassroots innovation that's unleashed through coworkers openly networking and sharing information across boundaries. Because of this new dynamic, dysfunctional teammates can damage the results of a whole team in a way that was much harder to do in the old siloed models of working. The most common and destructive toxic behaviors we see include backstabbing, criticizing and blaming, gossiping and spreading rumors, agreeing in meetings but not following through afterward, hoarding information, purposely undermining others, caring only about personal agendas over team and company goals. We've studied thousands of teams and collected data across all industries, sectors, and geographies to learn what makes some teams high performers and what makes others fail. Our research indicates that the single most important factor in team success is the quality of relationships on the team. In fact, 70% of the variance between the lowest performing teams, which we call saboteur teams, and the highest performing teams, or loyalist teams, correlates to the quality of relationships. Not some or most of the relationships, but all of them. Thus, one toxic team member is all it takes to destroy a high-performing team. Toxic team members do several destructive things. Create unnecessary drama and distraction. They suck the positive energy and creative brain power out of the room. Team members waste precious time watching their backs instead of innovating, taking risks, and speaking up candidly about what's on their minds. Erode the team brand. Bad behavior poorly represents the team and creates a negative impression with colleagues outside the team. In fact, our research shows that stakeholders outside the team are 2,000 times more likely to view loyalist teams as being effective in delivering results as compared with saboteur teams. It's clear that team dysfunction is highly correlated with team brand and results. Undermine the values of the leader and the company. It breeds cynicism when companies espouse values and norms of behavior, but don't hold all employees to the same standards. Degrade the team culture. The saboteur's behavior becomes the de facto norm. Well-intended team members begin to reflect this bad behavior as well, treating a toxic teammate with disrespect, griping behind their back, and keeping them out of the loop whenever possible. If you are the team leader, the way forward is clear. You need to acknowledge what's happening with the team, and you must hold the toxic team member accountable for their behavior. Regardless of their productivity, results, technical expertise, raw intelligence, or invaluable experience, you cannot tolerate behavior that drags down everyone else. But what can you do if the toxic person is your peer? Many employees tell us that they feel powerless to change peer behavior. In fact, some end up just leaving the team or company after the impact becomes insufferable. Here are 4 steps you can take to deal with a toxic coworker. Have an honest, candid conversation with the person. If you don't attempt to do this, you are 100% ensuring that the relationship will, at best, continue in its current dysfunctional state. You cannot assume this person will suddenly wake up and realize the error of their ways, so make an honest attempt to provide productive feedback. Focus on the impact the behavior is having on you. Ask for feedback on your own behavior as well. Sometimes people don't realize the impact they are having on others. Research shows that most of us lack self-awareness, especially at work. Members of loyalist teams are 106 times more likely to give each other feedback than those of saboteur teams, even when it's tough. Act as a loyalist yourself by opening up an honest, candid dialogue. Raise your own game and keep your ego in check. Don't stoop to their level. The more you can maintain your focus on team goals, the less likely you are to become blinded by win-lose thinking with this toxic peer. Be the role model for how you want the team to act. Set a standard that supports collaboration and open dialogue, not retaliation. On loyalist teams, members are 35 times more likely to show a visible commitment to each other's success and 47 times more likely to work hard to build and maintain trust, as compared with saboteur teams. Talk with your boss. Proactively suggest to your boss that the team hold a meeting to set up group norms and begin to address some of the challenging behaviors and conflicts on the team. This session should not be a ruse for taking the toxic team member to task. It should be a real and authentic interaction in which team members can gain insight into one another's perspectives, set clear standards of expected behavior, and increase peer-to-peer accountability. On loyalist teams, members are 73 times more likely to have a set of norms and behaviors they live by, and 125 times more likely to address unacceptable team behaviors promptly. Finally, take care of yourself. Don't let this toxic behavior damage your emotional and physical health. Own what you can, let go of what you can't influence, and make a change if you have to. If you have worked hard to develop better relationships with your saboteur coworkers, and it's going nowhere or getting worse, consider seeking the advice of an HR professional or trusted mentor on what else you might try. But if you've done everything you can, you should consider leaving. Life is too short for work to suck the life out of you. When you're working with a toxic coworker, there is no question that you're suffering from the experience, and it's quite likely that business results are suffering too. Quite often, the pain provides strong motivation to address the problems and propel things forward. But the work ahead is not easy, and we aren't going to lie to you. Rebuilding relationships and developing new habits takes a lot of energy and courage. However, once you fully commit to turning around your difficult relationship, you are likely to see improvements. Be well-intentioned in your efforts and persistent, and you'll reap the rewards.
Chapter 3. When You Feel Pressured to Do the Wrong Thing, by Joseph L. Badaracco. You've probably heard the story of the fraudulent business practices at Wells Fargo that came to light in 2016. Bank executives were pressuring employees to create false credit card and deposit accounts. Have you asked yourself, what would you do if you were an employee facing that kind of pressure? In other words, how do you handle a situation in which the incentives seem to be telling you to do something you believe is bad for your customers and clients, or maybe even illegal? And what if it's clear your boss wants you to get with the program, and your bonus, a promotion, or even your job is on the line? It's easy to think that these situations are black and white. Either you go along or you suffer the consequences. But sometimes these situations are gray, which I write about in Managing in the Gray. My central guidance is this: when you face a really tough problem, work through it and resolve it as a human being. This approach can help you avoid stark choices between getting ahead and doing something you believe is wrong. Here's how that advice applies to dealing with a situation where you think you are potentially being incentivized to do the wrong thing. Make sure you really understand the situation. What Wells Fargo did was clearly wrong, but other situations can be subtle. So make sure you ask yourself questions like these. Are the customers really being hurt? Is this a practice that's outside the industry standard or that clearly deviates from best practice? In what specific way does the practice violate ethics, customers' interests, or even the law? What is the alternative view of the situation? The one that says this practice is okay or even good for customers or others, and does it have some merit? Asking and answering these questions will help you in two ways. First, you will get a better sense of whether your initial judgment is sound or not, and second, if you decide that the practice is clearly wrong, you will have ammunition for making your case to others and persuading them to take your concerns seriously. You are also more likely to stick to your beliefs if you have really thought the situation through. If you can, check with others. Don't be a solitary genius. Try to find a knowledgeable, discreet person in your organization and run your concerns by them. Explain your evidence and your logic. Then ask if you might be missing something and if there might be other ways of thinking about the practice. If it continues to look as if something is seriously problematic, see what you can learn about the reasons your boss, and maybe your boss's bosses, are supporting it. You need to understand where they are coming from if you want to be effective and persuasive. Before moving forward, you also want to know if there is a political minefield ahead of you. Do a simple decision tree. It's natural to be caught up in the emotions of these situations. You can feel angry, threatened, anxious, or even fearful about your predicament. But you also need an objective view. So use the proverbial back of the envelope. List your options. Write down the possible consequences of each, and ask yourself how likely these consequences are. If you raise your concerns, what may happen and how likely is it? If you do what you're told, what risks are you running? What are the low probability but calamitous possibilities, like you're being investigated or indicted, that you really need to focus on? In short, a simple decision tree can give you a somewhat objective lay of the land and help you really think through your options, as you would for any business problem. Think creatively and practically. When someone tells great employees that the choice is A or B, they often reply, "What about C or D?" They are creative optimists about problems. They think there are better options out there and are willing to work at finding them. So ask yourself if there are other ways you could help your boss achieve their goals without crossing whatever ethical or legal lines concern you. You may surprise yourself and find a way out of the jam that works for you and your boss. Consider having a fairly candid conversation with your manager. This approach will appear on most decision trees, but it isn't a comfortable option. If it goes wrong, the conversation can be a career-limiting move. To increase the chances of success, you need to have a sound alternative for your boss and the right way to frame it. And you will probably have to pull your punches. Telling people they are behaving unethically usually comes across as an accusation, not an argument. The better framing is usually along the lines of, "I think we've got some serious legal risks here. We're doing something that could backfire with our clients or regulators," or, "The longer-term consequences of what we are doing could really backfire and hurt our careers." In other words, try to frame your concerns as practical, maybe urgent business issues. It's important to be realistic about these tough situations. Even if you follow the 5 steps, you may not find a way forward. Then you face a hard decision as a human being. You'll need to step back and ask whether you can live with yourself if you go ahead with the situation, or whether you should update your resume, take a stand, and hope for the best. The latter path can mean losing esteem in your superior's eyes or even leaving your job. But take heart that no matter what, your values will be intact.
Chapter 4. How Women of Color Can Protect Their Mental Health from Racial Bullying, by Ruchika Tulsian. The first time I was seriously bullied at work, I convinced myself it was no big deal. As the first woman in my family to graduate from a 4-year college, I thought I could handle anything. But my body knew something was wrong. My heart would beat faster when the elevator was about to open on my office's floor. I'd have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, despite being an early riser my whole life. I stopped wanting to socialize with friends, despite being an extrovert. Most of the time, I was just too exhausted to go anywhere. Then, the dark thoughts showed up, uncalled for. No one can see me here anyway, I kept thinking. I would replay scenarios in my head from interactions with coworkers. Initially, I would feel shame for not knowing how to respond to subtle acts of exclusion, also known as microaggressions, like having my name mispronounced and my English complimented, as well as to being the only woman of color in my department. But soon, I felt self-loathing and anxiety when, after a senior leader made a complaint about how I was difficult to work with, without giving any reasons or examples to back it up, I was at risk of being fired. Having no women of color to turn to, I felt like I was living in an alternative reality. Today, I know there's a term for what I experienced: racial gaslighting. But back then, I questioned myself literally every day. Eventually, the burden became too much to bear. I could see myself turning into a cynical, bitter shell of myself. I saw up close how the rules were different for my white peers, the white men and women who got promoted despite underperforming, the male leaders who only hired attractive white women. I was left out of meetings, social gatherings, and inside jokes, and I never saw anyone who looked like me. It took a toll, not just the bullying, but the daily acts of exclusion. Eventually I quit, despite advice from my family and friends that I shouldn't leave such a lucrative opportunity. But I was broken mentally and spiritually. It's common for victims of workplace discrimination to conceptualize how they are the problem. That conceptualization takes the form of guilt and shame, severe anxiety, and panic and worry, such that you can no longer be effective in your role, says Danielle Jenkins Henry, licensed marriage family therapist associate and founder of Dream Life Out Loud, a psychotherapy practice for Black women. You're isolating yourself because of the embarrassment and shame that you might feel for raising these types of concerns or trying to shield yourself from scrutiny, she notes. The cognitive distortions I started experiencing, where every interaction with my coworkers had me feeling stressed or anxious after the bullying incident, are common. It becomes a cycle and there's no way to get out. I interviewed hundreds of women of color for my book, Inclusion on Purpose. What I found was that my story wasn't unique, and due to a variety of factors, including a lack of mental health providers of color, women of color aren't getting the mental health help we need. It's a crisis where individual women of color begin blaming themselves for systemic bias. There's no cover or safety, says Jenkins Henry. You don't know whom to trust. You feel shame and embarrassment. How did I get myself into this? What could I have said, or what did I do? Or maybe I can try harder? Or maybe I can contort myself so that they'll see me and they'll recognize that I'm a high performer. And that is just a cycle of abuse. Women of color facing workplace bias and discrimination must take care of their mental health first and foremost. And while my interviews focused on women, all people of color can use this advice. Here's what to do. 1. Find adaptive coping strategies. Jenkins Henry notes that
Sample complete. Ready to continue?